Hey, hello everybody. Laurie Shaw Greyeyes, and I am the Riel Cree podcaster. And background on the Riel Cree, I'm a Muskeg Lake Cree Nation proud Indigenous Cree from Muskeg Lake, about an hour north of Saskatoon. I'm also Métis on my Cookham side, and on my grandpa's side, so my Mushroom side, I am Cree. So we're also working on my organization, which is GEN7Path. GEN7Path really focuses on really healing our Indigenous people, our elders, all the way down to the youth, through songs as medicine, through our speaker series, going global on Spotify. So if you want to look at us up, we're on gen7path.ca, we're on Spotify, and we're also on YouTube. And that is our songs as medicine. And today we have Michelle Robinson, and she is the Native Calgarian podcaster. And so I'm very honored to have her on today's podcast just to learn a little bit about what she does, learn about her background, and really looking at alignment between GEN7Path and the Riel Cree podcast and see how we can work together going forward. So let's just do a little introduction of Michelle to everybody on this podcast. Welcome, Michelle.
Well, hello, Laurie. I'm so honored to be here on your podcast. Thank you for having me. I sure hope I can get you on mine as well. To the folks listening, hello. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and thank you for supporting Indigenous people and our voices. I have a history online here with my podcast, but just activism in general here in Calgary. So my mother is Satu Dene, and I'm a registered Yellowknife Dene First Nation member. And I'm also a daughter of the Mayflower through my father. And I run a book club. I've run a book club since 2016 that's focused on reconciliation, as well as I have reconciliation action group that tries to advocate for issues for settlers who want to do more than just read and know, for folks who really want to do the action, the actual work when it comes to reconciliation and holding their governments to account, as well as their businesses, as well as media, as well as the calls to justice and the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. These are things we focus on and we try to advocate for. And I'm just honored to be here to talk to you all and hopefully inspire you all.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out a few questions to you, and then we'll look at some responses, and it could be collaborative. So let's talk about why Calgary? Why a podcast in specific Calgary? So is this where your roots are?
Yeah, I was actually born here. And even before I really started to unravel colonialism and racism, it really bothered me when people would call themselves a Native Calgarian. So I actually took that back as a way to try to claim, saying you're a Native Calgarian, even though you're born in Calgary, is not really appropriate when we're supposed to be treaty partners and talking about Indigenous issues. So my mother came to SAIT in order to study to become a secretary and do office work and such. And then her funding ran out, and I had a shotgun wedding, and I was born in 1977 here in Calgary. So I've been in Calgary most of my life, and I'll probably be here until the end of my life as well. Yeah, that's a little bit about why I named it Native Calgarian and a little bit about my history here. I also lived in Fort McMurray for 2 years as a child, and Sylvan Lake from grade 3 to 12. So I came back here immediately because at that time, even in 1990s, I felt like there weren't as many opportunities as there would be in Calgary. And I knew Calgary because my stepmother, she had family here, so we would always come to Calgary as well. So I've always felt very tied to Calgary through my entire life, and I have been here most of my life now. So that's a little bit about why I'm here in Calgary and why it's Native Calgarian and why I talk about issues about, urban Indigenous issues here in Calgary.
So thank you for that update. Just a couple of things I want to talk about is our Indigenous. So, I've done some research, and they're basically saying up to 1,000 years ago, there was, up to 500 million people Indigenous on Turtle Island, right? And I'm just amazed at those numbers because right now I've done my research on Canada, and we have 1.8 million Indigenous at least registered in Canada as Indigenous. That's 5% of the population. So we're considered a minority. So let's talk about, and we talk about blood quantum in Canada. We talk about self-governance. We talk about what's happening with honor reserves. They want to go to their own self-governance, but they also want to look at, blood quantum. So I am a second generation. My mom went to residential school. My children are third generation. And some of the reserves want to stop at, fourth and fifth generation. So let's talk to you about what are your thoughts on that view?
Yeah, so in my opinion, that's just the Indian Act. When I still vote in the Yellowknife Dene elections. And one of the questions I always ask the counselors as well as the chief is like, are you going to adopt your children, your grandchildren? Because what has happened through the 60 scoop policies as well as marriage and people not knowing that they can apply to get their status is that a lot of, visibly Indigenous grandchildren are not status. And, at the end of the day, the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People talk about our inherent rights. We all have these grandchildren who are not status have inherent rights to these lands. And no Indian Act dictates to us if we're Native or non-Native. So if you're a non-status Indigenous person out there in the world listening to this, I really encourage you to learn more about your community, learn more about the Indian Act, and learn more how that is a colonial tactic to divide our inherent rights to these lands, because that's not really a chief and council thing. Chief and council was imposed through the Indian Act. Our hereditary chiefs, our hereditary leadership, that's what we're building in our reserves right now, so that we can start to transition away from the Indian Act and have real governance, and that those who are no longer status can feel comfortable coming back into their community, identifying, learning their language, and learning about their inherent rights.
Excellent. I love it. So thank you for that update and beautiful summary. What I would like to talk about is in July, it's an important holiday in Canada. It's Canada Day. So, my question to you is, everybody has a different view, the Indigenous. What does Canada Day mean to you?
To be frank, I was very colonized. I even have a maple leaf tattoo, and I identified as Canadian for most of my life. Only recently, when I had my daughter at the age of 30 and I experienced systemic discrimination and racism at the hospital, was when I really started to unpack and be a proud Native. So for me, Canada itself is supposed to be about a treaty partnership. And our ancestors signed those treaties with good intentions, in good faith, even under duress. So Canada has a choice. They can choose to be good treaty partners or choose not to be good treaty partners. And for me, that's what I celebrate for Canada Day, is to talk about, and I'm usually asked to speak about certain issues. I happily do that. And for me personally, I would just like to see all Canadians understand that we're all treaty partners and we have a choice to be a good treaty partner or a bad one, and that our government has not acted in good faith with the Indian Act, and that we need to transition away from that in order to become better treaty partners. So that's how I look at Canada Day, is a time to educate about treaty.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to shift a little bit. I know that Musqueam Cree Nation is one of the first bands in Canada to go to the Supreme Court to have a document signed, so a memorandum of understanding for self-governance. So they are working towards self-governance and disbanding the Indian Act, at least for our reserve, for Musqueam Cree Nation. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So what are your thoughts about us, the Indigenous, in our treaties going to self-governance?
Well, that's the way it's supposed to be. That is what treaty is, actually, is that we're allowed to have self-governance. Canada can have their Westminster political system, and that the two, we should be able to work together and to celebrate together, to share profits together, and to govern together. And so that, to me, is what we should be aiming for and working towards. So for me, that's like the start of this bigger conversation of what reconciliation is supposed to be. And that is, 634 nations having that self-determination and having self-governance, working with the Canadian government, and that should be our treaty partnership fully realized.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to take this a little closer to home. I'm going to take it to Alberta. So we talk about separating from the rest of Canada, so through Danielle Smith. And there's been a lot of conversation with regards to the Indigenous. Can you share your view on the separation?
Yeah, so I think it's important, especially for Albertans, to understand that Alberta and the provinces were never negotiated under treaty. Technically, neither was Canada. We were negotiating with the British Crown. And so when Canada decided to be separate from Britain, that became the person that we're supposed to be working with, not provinces. So what is happening right now is that unfortunately Albertans are ignorant and unaware, educated on treaty. Because of this, what they don't know, what they're advocating for, goes against international law when it comes to our treaty rights. So if they were even somewhat successful, unfortunately, what that would mean was that it would default back to Treaty 6, Treaty 7, Treaty 8, a little bit of 4, a little bit of 10, and it would actually default back to the First Nations. And so I think, unfortunately, there isn't an understanding, but a lot of the white supremacists that believe they have rights to these lands, they're actually preparing for a race war. And it's really unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that way. But I think white supremacists always side on violence first. And it doesn't have to be that way because we're willing to share the land. We just need to recognize the governance. And unfortunately, that's exactly why they want to separate from Canada, which I think is really, really terrible. It's literally an anti-Indigenous idea to separate away from Canada and to break the international treaties that we created with Britain.
Thank you. Gen 7 really has been developed under, really, when we look at Crazy Horse, he basically said in 1842, there'll be 7 generations after the non-Indigenous or white man came to Turtle Island. There'll be a revolution and the redskin will rise. And they'll come under one sacred tree, regardless of denomination, regardless of gender, regardless of skin color. So that time is now. So what I see and is happening is a lot of non-Indigenous want to learn about what happened to the Indigenous in Canada and really on Turtle Island. And they're coming together because they understand, we're all one. We're all one. It doesn't matter. We're all human. We're all on this earth to be together for this short time. And I see that momentum happening. And that's why I've created GEN7Path. So thank you. It's really aligning and making sure people don't realize, like the Indigenous, they fought amongst each other, before the white settlers came, and they did it, spiritually, for land, for food, and for, what they believed in and their specific values for their tribe. But things changed. Things changed when, guns were introduced to us and alcohol was introduced to us. So what I always say, when you see that Indigenous person on the street, they've gone through a lot. Residential school was implemented for 102 years from 1880 to 1998, and they are the offspring of that residential school survivor, or they are a residential school survivor. So everybody has a story, everybody has a background, just like me and you do, and just let them know that they are loved on Turtle Island. And we have to share the love. And I do that with my teachings and through my songs as medicine and music. So just one more thing that I think is really important is let's talk about missing, murdered women, Indigenous, Two-Spirit. So let's talk about your activism, what you're doing, and how we can help.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you for that. I think for a lot of folks, they were unaware of this issue for a long time. Being here in Calgary, we had Stephen Harper right on the record say that that is not an issue he is concerned about. It wasn't on his radar, is how he put it. So I actually joined the Liberal Party and I worked with the Liberal Party. We unanimously voted in favor for the national inquiry. And I know a lot of folks didn't feel the national inquiry hit the things that they needed to say as Indigenous families. And I hate that it hurt some people. I do. But out of that came 231 calls to justice. And I advocate every single day of my life for that and the 94 calls to action to honor all of the families that worked really hard to put those 2 reports together. The Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, well, that was done in 1996. I didn't have access to that. I didn't have the internet. at that time. So I still advocate for those 444 recommendations as well, because to me, that's honoring our ancestors and honoring what they wanted. And to me, I have to honor the treaty regardless of Canada breaking treaty. I think my ancestors signed those in good faith, and I know I have inherent rights to these lands, as do you, as do other Indigenous people. So for me, it is important that we're always honoring those voices. So when it comes to the advocacy for missing and murdered, exploited Indigenous families, I really focus on those 231 calls to justice. And so we have vigils here in Calgary regularly, October 4th, May 5th. We have a march that your niece does on Valentine's Day. And these are times that we try to reflect on the sacrifice for Canada to be here and for Canada to exist, and for Canadians to live a happy life at the expense of all of these exploited families that unfortunately are still trying to heal with systems that are not meant and designed for them. So I advocate for cultural healing practices and cultural healing centers, and for non-Indigenous, as Call to Action 57, to have anti-racism training as well as Indigenous education, so that we can start having more trauma-informed, culturally relevant counseling and help for our people in order to, as good treaty partners, we should be working towards for a healthier Canada. And the truth is, too, I've always advocated for other cultures to have cultural healing practices as part of our mental health structure. And unfortunately, a lot of Canadians don't understand mental health or addiction and have stigmatized it, which is really unfortunate, because I think that could be a real turning point for all of us. But I'm hoping that we're going to see a shift in this conversation, because we've done so many cuts that I think people are starting to understand the more cuts you do to mental health, the more crime goes up. And the more, if we really want to reduce crime, adding police is not helping it. What will help it, though, is adding more to mental health services. So that's where I'm hoping we can go. So just encourage people to learn the 231 calls to justice, implement them in their work, implement them in their life, implement them in their nonprofit, their church, whatever it is that you do spiritually. But of course, hold the governments to account on them as well, because they have to do a lot of heavy lifting as well. And then join us. Join the families. Unfortunately, we do have regular vigils that are not scheduled. Vigils happen when deaths happen. So support families like, say, the John Wells family, support families of the English families, support families that have lost a loved one, and come to these vigils that I talked about.
Excellent. Excellent. I appreciate your time. In closing, I just want to say that GEN7Path is launching a song called Break the Chain. So Break the Chain, it's the first rap song that we're launching, and it's to do with fentanyl awareness and abuse. And it really talks about breaking the chain of depression and rise up and bring these children back to our land, back to traditional healing. So I'll let you know when it launches, and you can broadcast it along. And we will have a music video with it. But we are in gen7path.ca and Gen7Path on YouTube. And I applaud you for the work that you do, Michelle. I am proud to call you sister, and I would welcome me to join your podcast to talk a little bit about what we're doing on Gen7Path. And the Creator has blessed me today with this specific message to our people. I'm going to pause at the end for 20 seconds. And then we'll just do our own personal prayer. And I want to thank you for your day. Hi. Thank you, Creator, for blessings received. Let's carry on with good work that we're doing for the Indigenous and non-Indigenous on the path to truth and reconciliation. We do have September 30th coming up, which is National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And my mandate is to get our word out there. So when September 30th comes, it's not just wearing an orange shirt on September 30th. It's recognizing who we are as the Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and heal together as one on Turtle Island. Hi. Blessings received. Have a beautiful day.
Masicho.